Hello everyone. In today's video I'm going to be swatching out all my Rembrandt watercolors. I know I did this a few months back, but I've had a few additions since then, and hopefully I'm going to film it a bit better this time. Okay, so let's get started. First up, we have Cadmium Yellow Lemon. And this one is pigment PY35. This is a beautiful, clean, bright yellow. I really do like it a lot. It's the only non-earth yellow I use in my palette. I sometimes think about trying out PY129 or PY150, but I haven't got around to it yet. Next is Cadmium Red Light. This one is PR108 and PO20. This is a bright, warm red. It's almost orange. This one's been discontinued by Rembrandt. Instead of having 3 cadmiums like I've got, a light, medium and deep, they just have 2 now, just a Cadmium Red and Cadmium Red Deep. Next is Cadmium Red Medium, which is PR108. This is a good middle red. I don't use this one all that much, but I keep it in my palette for when I need a fire engine red. Next is Cadmium Red Deep. Again, this is PR108. This is a slightly cooler cadmium red. It's a nice colour, but I much prefer the medium. Now we've got Carmine, which is PR264 and PV19. This is the old version of Carmine. Now it's been replaced by a single pigment, PR264. I do like this paint a lot, but I don't use it that often. I don't tend to use cool reds in general, but I do want to start incorporating them into my palette a bit. I tend to just rely on earth reds at the moment. Next is Permanent Madder Lake. This is PR264 and PV19. So that's the same pigments as the Carmine. It'll be interesting to see if there's much of a difference. I believe this one's been discontinued as well. It's been replaced by a single pigment PR187. The next one is Quinacridone Rose Magenta. This is a new colour for me. I only got it yesterday, so this is the first time I'm painting it out. I've never used a PR122 before, but many people have recommended it to me, so I thought I'd give it a go. It's definitely not the kind of colour I would usually use, but I do know it's a very useful mixing colour, so I'll see how it is. Next is Permanent Red Violet. And this one's PV19. It's a very intense colour, I like it a lot. I have the Magella version of this colour, but I much prefer this Rembrandt one. Now on to Cobalt Violet. This is PV14. When I first got this paint, I had quite a bit of trouble with it. I tried to paint with it straight from the tube, and all I got was like a horrible gummy mess. It just wouldn't paint out nicely at all. I thought maybe it separated in the tube, but no amount of shaking or mixing with a toothpick would help at all. But after a few people suggested squeezing it all out into a pan and letting it dry, and then it turned out to be a very nice, delicate, granulating paint. Yeah, so much better. I don't use it that often, but I do quite like it actually. Next is Ultramarine Violet, which is PV15. This is also a paint I don't really use very often. It's a very delicate, granulating violet, and I probably should experiment with it a bit more. Yeah, maybe I could find a use for it. Next is Ultramarine Deep, which is PB29. So everyone knows this color. There's nothing, no surprises here really. It's a nice ultramarine. Nothing particularly special about it. It's pretty intense and it granulates okay. I'm not really a fan of ultramarine, to be honest. I like the color when I paint it out, but for some reason I just don't like it when I have it in my palette. It's a useful mixing color, but I think I just find it boring. Next we have Indanthrene Blue, which is PB60. Yeah, this one can get very dark in mass tone. It's a beautiful color, but whenever I've had it in my palette, I just didn't seem to use it for anything. Now we have Cobalt Blue, which is PB28. This is actually my favorite blue. When I have it in my palette, I use it in pretty much every painting. It's a lovely middle blue and it granulates a little bit too. It is expensive though, so usually I replace it with the Phthalo Blue Red shade. And next is Phthalo Blue Red shade, which is PB15. I looked on handprint and I believe this is a PB15-1. This is often the main blue on my palette. I prefer the red shade to the green shade. And I particularly like the greens I can get when I mix it with my earth yellows. It's a very intense colour though, so it can easily overpower mixes, so it takes a bit of getting used to. I do love it though, and I think it'll always have a place on my palette. And next we have Cerulean Blue. This one is PB35. I'm definitely not a fan of Cerulean Blue. I know many people love it, and when I paint it out here, it actually looks quite nice, but I don't know, for some reason, whenever I use it in a painting, I'm kind of always disappointed and wish I'd used either Cobalt or Phthalo. Maybe I don't like the granulation. Yeah. I've recently started using Lucas PB36 Cerulean Blue though, and I enjoy that much more, so yeah, maybe it's just I don't like PB35. Next is Turquoise Blue, which is PB15 and PG7. It's a nice colour, but I never use it. It'd probably be good for something like Tropical Seas. I don't really know. I don't use a turquoise in my palette. I have thought about getting a cobalt turquoise though. I hear it's very good for mixing greens. I think that might be more useful than this multi-pigment mix. Next is Cobalt Green. The tube says it's a PG26, but I've been told that actually it's mislabeled and it's a PG19. Much like the Cobalt Violet, I found this to be horrible and gummy when I tried to paint straight from the tube. But again, I squeezed it out into a pan and let it dry, and then it paints out nicely after that. I still wouldn't say I particularly like the colour though. It seems a bit weak and uninteresting to me. Next is Chromium Oxide Green. This is PG17. I don't really like using greens from a tube, but this one's quite nice. is already quite natural looking, and it's easy to adjust it with other pigments on my palette. Alright, so now onto the earth colours. The first one is yellow ochre. This is PY43 and PY42. I'm not really sure why it's made from two pigments, but it's a perfectly fine yellow ochre. It's quite opaque, but not as opaque as other brands I've used. I tend to rotate between this and Raw Sienna or Rembrandt's Raw Umber. I've recently got the Rembrandt Raw Sienna, so I'll see if I prefer that one to this. Next is transparent oxide yellow, and this is PY42. I was a bit disappointed with this colour. It looks okay here, but in use it's a really weak mixer. I had it in my palette for a while and was quite happy when I used it up, to be honest. I much prefer a yellow ochre or raw sienna, so I'll probably stick with them in the future. It's not a bad colour, it's just not as nice as I hoped. Next is raw sienna, and this is PY43. I only got this tube yesterday, so this is the first time I've ever tried it. I've tried other brands of raw sienna, of course, but for some reason I've never used the Rembrandt version. Most raw siennas I've tried in the past have been PBR7, so it'd be interesting to see if I like this one or not. On first impression, it looks pretty good, I think. I like that it has a little bit of granulation going on. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to using it in an actual painting. Next is burnt sienna, which is PBR7. I do much prefer PBR7 burnt sienna rather than the PR101 that a few other brands use. It's a decent burnt sienna, though probably not the best in my opinion. It's maybe a little more orange than some of the other brands. But it does the job I want it to, so yeah, I don't have any problems using this one. Next is light oxide red, which is PR101. I'm quite sad that Rembrandt don't make this paint anymore. It's one of my favourites, so I kind of have to try and find a replacement somewhere else. Anyone have any recommendations of a good PR101 light oxide red? Now on to Indian red. This is PR101 and PR264. This is actually my favourite red, though I often think about removing it from my palette and replacing it with a cool red. I think if I did that though, I'd probably miss it quite a bit. I know this is a two pigment mix rather than a single PR101 like most other brands offer, but there's just something about this Rembrandt Indian red that I really like. Now on to raw umber, which is PBR7. This is yet another one of my favourite Rembrandt colours that they've decided to discontinue. It's very annoying. It's been replaced by a really ugly greenish raw umber. Well, actually, I don't know if it's ugly or not, but I hate it anyway. This raw umber is actually much more yellow than other brands. It almost reminds me of some PBR7 raw siennas. Yeah, I really do like this one a lot. Now on to burnt umber, which is also PBR7. I often alternate between having either burnt sienna or burnt umber on my palette. It's not very often that I would have both on my palette. I tend to find burnt sienna to be a bit more useful, but I always miss burnt umber when I don't have it. I think this is a very nice burnt umber. It's definitely one of the better ones that I've tried. And finally we have Payne's Grey, which is PBK6 and PB15. I wouldn't say this Payne's Grey is anything particularly special. It's not as blue as I would like my Payne's Grey to be, but it's easy to add some blue to it, and I do use it in pretty much every painting, so I guess I must like it. Okay, that's all of them painted out. Now I've just got to wait for them all to dry. Okay, so here's all 27 Rembrandt colours that I own, photographed in daylight when completely dry. This is way more colours than I would ever have in my palette at any one time, but it's always nice to have some options if I want to change things up a bit. There's quite an absence of non-earth yellows in my collection. I don't know why, but the yellows in the Rembrandt range just aren't all that inspiring to me. I like the reds I have here. I quite look forward to experimenting with the Quinacridone Magenta. And the blues I have here are pretty nice. As long as I have a nice Ultramarine, Cobalt Blue and Phthalo Blue Red shade, that's pretty much all I ever need. Though I'm tempted to try the PB36 Cerulean Blue. I'm happy with the selection of earths that I have here. I've been using Rembrandt Watercolors now for more than 6 months. And on the whole, I've been really happy with them. I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're any better or worse than any other brand of artist grade watercolors, but they definitely suit my style of painting, and they're very high quality. So what are your views on Rembrandt paints? Have you used them, or do you plan to use them? Do you have any particular favourite colours in the range? Let me know in the comments. And as usual, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.